So Marion has an extensive background in our industry with over 40 years of experience. He's one of the most accomplished professional photography experts in the country. After receiving his formal photography training under master photographer Bill Cowan, Marion launched a successful wedding photography business in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Seeking to expand his photography and business experience, he moved into a managerial role at the Herb Jones division in Portland, Oregon in 1989. After several years in the volume photography business, he was appointed as a director of photography for one of the largest volume photography studios in the U.S., where he trained and supported over 500 photographers on a daily basis. So you can see the unbelievable background that Marion has in this industry. So I'm really excited for him to present to you guys today. We're very proud to have him as our volume photography expert and consultant at Pounds and Nations Photo Lab, where he continues to provide unparalleled training and support schools, sports, and event photographers. His goal is to help photographers master their craft. They feel confident in providing customers the best possible images to gain a competitive advantage in their market and grow their business. Without further ado, I want to introduce Marion Hughes and let Marion go ahead and do he does best. Marion?
Hi everybody, this is Marion Hughes. What I'd like to share with you today is the secrets of consistency. A lot of us can take 100 pictures and pull out 3 or 4 good ones. A lot of us can do highly skilled work on an intermittent basis. The main thing is we need to know the challenges and the shortcomings of our equipment. And that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about today, how to get around those. It's the dirty little secrets of digital photography. Number 1, don't trust the seat of your pants. Shooting by the seat of your pants is going to get you into trouble. The view screen on the back of your camera is unreliable as to exposure and contrast. Histograms can be very tricky. Equipment must be tuned to be accurate. Preset white balances are never exact. And by all means, the worst of them is auto white balance. Auto anything makes auto mistakes, and shooting raw means a lot of Photoshop time. Now, I know that a lot of people are kind of married to shooting raw. They're usually married to it because they want to be able to recover any mistakes they made. So my recommendation to you is to learn to shoot raw plus JPEG. And when you really master your equipment, you won't have to go to the raw images at all. You'll just be able to use the JPEG images, and that's going to save you a tremendous amount of time in post-production, because I've been saying for years, Photoshop is an adult video game. It can take all of your time. If it takes you an hour to photograph a session, but another 2 hours to play with it in Photoshop, you're not making money in Photoshop. If you can get it right in the camera, you don't have to worry about that. So let's move on and look at some of the things that happen that can be corrected. Exposure. The price is right is right. Remember the show Price is Right? Well, you know, if you bid on an item, you've got to get as close as you can without going over. That's the same theory as the way that digital photography works. Those of us that remember the old film days, we had a latitude that wouldn't quit. You could shoot a stop and a half under, you could shoot 2, 3 stops over and still recover a print. Digital doesn't have that advantage. It's got a very narrow latitude. You can work from a stop under to a third of a stop over and get reasonable results. But even if you're using raw files, you can't recover much more than that and make it look like it would have been if it had been exposed right in the first place. So let's see. When you expose something correctly, you've got great detail in the highlights and in the shadows. This kid's hair has great detail in it. His white teeth, you can enlarge this and look right at the cracks in his teeth. No challenges there. The picture was exposed normally. It went through the lab like snot through a snail. Now we look at a picture that's underexposed by a stop. When your lab or yourself correct that image, they can get a correction, but they can't get it perfect. You'll notice the picture looks a little flatter, a little less saturated. The hair is going to look a little ghosty, but it's a saleable print. Now, if you overexpose, it's a totally different animal. Overexposure is one of the 2 major devils in digital photography. When you try to correct an overexposed photograph, the contrast goes up, the highlight detail goes down. You'll never get a picture that's overexposed by much more than a stop corrected, even in RAW, with it looking like it did originally. So the trick here is to get the exposure exactly right. I'm going to show you how you can do that. Get as close to correct as possible without going over. Consistency requires that we know the variables. So let's look at them. Your STUDIO strobes are out to get you. Now, I don't know what kind of strobes you may have. You may not have STUDIO strobes at all. But if you do, you'll find that there are two general types, analog and digital. There's also continuous lighting. In STUDIO strobes, analog and digital are identified as those that are a little bit older, and you can turn them up and down with a slider or a dial, but there's no readout. The nice thing about these is they're cheap. A lot of people use Alienbees and others that are not that expensive. But as long as you know the shortcomings of those strobes, you can still use them and save a lot of money. The other type is digital, and there's plenty of people making digital strobes right now. Those will have a readout on them that'll tell you exactly what setting you're at. Let's look at the challenges with each. Digital strobes give you a more precise exposure, and that's a good thing. They maintain your color, in most of them anyway, but they may blur action. The way a digital strobe reduces its power is that it actually extends the amount of flash time. In other words, the strobe is lit longer, and that way it can reduce its power without changing its color. The challenge there is, if you're doing action photography, you're going to have some blurring in it. A friend of mine was into photographing skiers at a park in Colorado, and he would dig out a cave under the ski jump, and as they fly over, he'd take their picture. Well, he was using analog strobes. He's actually using Alienbees, and he's getting a good result, but he decided he wanted to upgrade to a digital strobe. He could not stop the action. He had to go back to his older analog strobes. Now, analog strobes are wonderful because they're so cheap and they're reliable, but they do have some shortcomings. They can shift color between the maximum exposure and the minimum exposure. They require a warm-up time. If you have analog strobes, you need to warm them up to prevent them from getting brighter while you're working. If you know your strobes, you got to test your strobes. To do that, what you're going to do is you're going to set them up and make a reading after you turn it on, and then photograph immediately a gray card or some standard chart. Wait 30 minutes, reasonable warm-up time, and then fire the lights 30 times, 5 seconds apart. This emulates the same thing as running your strobes for a couple of hours. Test by metering after the warm-up, and if you find there's a difference, then you've got to warm up your strobes to use them properly. If you have analog strobes, don't go throw them out and run straight and buy digitals. Take your analog strobes, and when you arrive at your site or before you start photographing, turn them on, set them to full power. I do a lot of on-location photography, so what I do is I'll take my strobes to an outlet, I'll plug them in and turn them on to full power, and then I'll walk away and go set up the kit. When I'm through setting up the kit, that's 15 minutes or so, I come back, I take those full power strobes and put them into the stands, getting them ready to work, leave them at full power, and then I fire them once every 5 seconds. I do that about 30 times. And that forms the capacitors in your strobe so that they don't change for the rest of the day. So it's possible to get away with less expensive strobes if you just warm them up. If you don't do this, you'll find your lights get brighter, sometimes as much as 2/3 of a stop in an hour. Analogs can be inconsistent at low power. When you turn them down below 8th power, they will vary in exposure just a bit. So you want to keep them above 8th power, and you want to warm them up. This is a simple test where you can take 30 images at 8th power and 5 seconds apart and see if the exposures vary by photographing a tritone or color target. This again is to tell you that your strobes are working correctly or whether or not you need to warm them up. Repeat at 1/4 power. Now let's look at this. Analogs may color shift between low and high power. So what I do is when I'm writing a lighting diagram, I make sure that the power on each light stays between about quarter power, and full, and you don't see that color shift as much. Just stay away from things below 8 power for sure. Okay, let's look at this. Posted sync speeds on your cameras. Most of you have a camera that syncs at a 250th of a second. Well, that's only true if you pop up a little strobe on the camera or have a portable strobe plugged directly into the hot shoe. Anytime you separate the lights from the camera and use a radio strobe, or use a radio sync, or use a cord, whatever you're doing to get the strobe away from the camera, is going to slow down the apparent sync speed. And if you're using studio strobes, they'll never sync regularly at a 250th of a second. So what I suggest that you do is you can test it to make sure it's right by shooting a white wall at a 60th of a second up to a 400th of a second on strobe. You'll have all these images to look at. You'll notice the camera is supposed to sync at 250. In this particular case, you see the dark area at the bottom of the image? That's where the camera did not completely sync. In reality, what happened is the mirror did not get completely out of the way before the strobe went off. You see at 320, it's definitely out of sync. But look at 200. Now, depending on your monitor, you should be able to see a difference between 200 and 160. The 160 is lighter. Well, in this particular case, that strobe did not sync at 200 because it still kept back a little bit of the light. It still didn't sync completely. What I recommend is when you're using strobes, using studio strobes, or any strobe on a radio remote, set it between 125 and 160. 125 is my favorite, 160 if I'm outside. By doing that, you'll be sure you have a sync every time. You will have a situation where if you do use a fairly high shutter speed, like a 200th of a second, some of the pictures will be lighter and darker, and they'll almost always be from one edge. And this is because, again, studio strobes have a longer flash duration, therefore they take longer to put out all their light, and if your sync speed is too high for that strobe, you won't get all of the image. All cameras are not created equal. You can have two cameras that come right out of the factory, one serial number apart, and one could be a third of a stop bright, and the other one could be a third of a stop dark. When Canon or Nikon or anybody else produces a camera, they can't make all those sensors perfect, or the cost of the camera would be too high. So they say, oh, if it's a third of a stop of where it's supposed to be, it's okay. But if you're doing volume work where you need consistency, and you have 3 or 4 cameras at the same job, you want them all to look exactly alike. So some of your cameras will be a little bit bright and some will be a little bit dark. The reason I bring this up is that a meter can't correct for that. Also, lenses coming out of the factory can be, at f11 could be actually f10 or it could be f14, even though it's labeled f11 because there's a third of a stop variance in the lenses as well. If you want a perfect camera, you probably have to buy Leica, and even they're not absolutely perfect. Okay, meters must be tuned to your camera and lens to be useful. So if you use meters, and you just hit the meter out of the box, and you've got a camera out of the box, and the camera's a third of a stop bright, and then the lens is a third of a stop bright, and who knows what your meter is set to, the results would be you could be shooting a third to a full stop over or underexposed depending upon the equipment that you're using. And I'm going to show you how to get that exposure perfect every time. And by the way, the only meters I own now are in my antique collection. I don't use a meter anymore because I have an alternate method. These are camera exposure charts. These are 3 different companies. They're all reasonably good. Absolutely best one, and these are used for getting your exposure correctly because you have to have a standardized chart to do that. And you can use the standardized chart to tune your meter to match your camera. The Munzel Color Checker was the first and the best. It's well built. It will never yellow. It is an excellent piece of equipment. Though when I get one, I always put a black dot right in the middle so I have something to focus on when I'm photographing it. The other possibility is the Ed Pierce's calibration target. It's both of these are a little on the pricey side. Both of these have 3 tones on them. And I'll explain in a minute how you work with those. The third is Pounds Labs White Balance Exposure Target. This is the least expensive one, and in my opinion, the most accurate. And the reasoning for that is it's specifically tuned to give you an ideal exposure. And color. And you don't need the gray in there, because here's another dirty little secret of digital photography. 18% reflectance gray was designed for film. Digital ideal is 22% reflectance gray. But you won't get anybody to tell you that. All of these are based on 18% reflectance. Mine is black and white. That's the one that I built, the Pounds White Balance Exposure Target. And it doesn't need a gray. I'll show you a little bit about how to use that. Okay, the target comes with a book on the dirty little secrets of digital photography and a focus testing chart. It looks like the picture on the right. What you do is you photograph, you go to the point where you're going to take the picture of the person, and you hold it up and you just take a picture of the center part. All the white, a little bit of the black. When you do that, you get only 2 spikes on your histogram. Okay, these are the highlights and the shadows. The height of the light, the height of the spike means nothing. However, if the 2 spikes, they move together like prongs on a fork, move to the left, you're underexposed for that f-stop. If they move to the right, you're overexposed. When they're right in the middle, you have the ideal exposure. And if you can't tell if it's off a little bit, it's so close it's less than 1/10 of a stop off. When it gets more than 1/10 of a stop off, it's obvious that it's wrong. Now, if you're using the other color checkers, Ed Pierce's or Munsell color checker, they also have a spike that's supposed to be in the middle for the gray, and but pay no attention to it whatsoever. Using a gray card, like I mentioned earlier, the right density of a gray card is not 18% reflectance gray for digital. It's 22. You're not going to find a gray card that's 22% reflectance. So if you use a gray card to get your exposure or a expo disc and you get the spike right in the middle, you're actually underexposing just a little bit. And that's on purpose because they don't want you to overexpose, but we want you to get it as accurate as possible. So it's just a matter of following 2 spikes to get the exposure right. Once the exposure is correct, you examine the histogram. Once it is correct, then you can white balance. Adjust the power up or down and reshoot and repeat. In other words, keep turning it up and down. This is how you would tune your meter. Now, once you've got a perfect exposure, you put your meter at the same site with the same settings on it and take a meter reading. If that meter reading doesn't match the f-stop you were shooting at exactly, like f8 or whatever you're shooting at, then the meter needs to be adjusted. Then the meter will match the camera and you can continue to use it. However, you still have the problems where lenses can be out of focus. But again, the advantage of having perfect exposure can't be underrated. Perfect exposure gives you detail you can't get any other way. What you're looking now is a focusing target. By the way, these focusing targets, PDF can be sent to you if you request them at no charge. And it is designed to make it possible to tell if your lens is focusing at exactly where it says it is. Basically, what you're going to do is going to set it at an angle, a low angle, about 20 degrees. And with a single focusing point, you're going to focus on the target at the center. Let me go back. This target right here at the center. Okay, because it's at a low angle, parts closer to you will be out of focus and parts further away will be out of focus. And only the point you focus should be sharp. If you look carefully at this image, you'll notice that look at like -3 and +3. +3 is sharp, -3 is blurry. So this is actually focusing forward about 2 points. You would need to do this at 3 different ranges on a zoom lens. So the way I usually do this, and a full set of instructions comes with it, is I'll set the camera to f5.6. I'll lay an 11 by 17 copy of the target on the tabletop, and I'll get down at a low angle. You can even use a little pop-up strobe if that's what you've got, but make sure that your shutter speed's high enough that you don't blur. If you're going to be doing this available light, use a tripod. Focus carefully on that spot and squeeze the shutter. Do that at each of your set zoom positions, or at a minimum, wide angle, mid-range, and telephoto. so that you can see if the picture is absolutely sharp where you've focused on each of those settings. Many times you'll find you have a lens that's perfectly sharp at telephoto, perfectly sharp at mid-range, but at wide angle it's way off. The lenses I'd like to warn people about are those all-purpose lenses that go from like 18 millimeters to 200 or 250. I've yet to see one of those that can produce a good sharp image at all three settings. And some of them will focus beautifully at telephoto, a little soft at normal, and be off by yards at the wide angle range. So if you have one of those lenses, you need to get one of these free targets from me so that you can test them. Okay, back to all custom white balance is very important. When you're shooting in most situations with ambient light, in most situations in ambient light, you could get away with using electronic flash for your setting because sunlight and a cloudy day are very close to electronic flash. On a open shade day where you're shooting under the sky with sky as your only light source, your white balance can be extremely off. This is covered more in a presentation that I have on simplified outdoor portrait photography. When you're working inside, and if you are a volume photographer and you move from site to site, a red carpet or yellow walls will give you a different color in different rooms. So what I do is I get the exposure absolutely perfect using a white balance target like the Wivet, and once I get it perfect and get that accurate exposure, then I'll white balance the camera. Now, here's another dirty little secret of digital photography. Nikon and Canon both will correct your color when you set custom white balance, but the first correction is only 85% of the way to perfect. Now, if yesterday you used the same camera under the same kind of lighting, a single white balance was probably going to work. But let's say yesterday you were photographing a football game and you white balance for that, and today you're shooting under strobes. You white balance today, you won't get a perfect color. The only way to get a really, really good color is to take a second image and white balance twice. The second image corrects it the rest of the way from 85% correction all the way up to 100. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, dirt and dust. My friends, I've had territories that I've worked with that are in Arizona, and I swore that they were plowing the desert with their cameras. Dust is a major problem, even if you have anti-dust anti-dust application on your camera. How that works is when you do the cleaning, the electronic cleaning, it shakes the sensor sonically, very, very fast. Any dust that might be on the sensor and big enough that gravity can take it will fall down to the bottom of the camera. Most of them have an adhesive pad at the bottom of the sensor. And the adhesive pad lets the dust stick to it so that it doesn't fly back up and get on your lens again. But that only works if the camera's horizontal. So when you're trying to use your electronic dust remover, have the camera horizontal and stable when you turn it off and on. You might even turn it off and on with the dust activation each time, several times, to get rid of some dust. Dust contamination can be detected and corrected and prevented. Change lenses only when it's truly necessary. If you've got a favorite lens on a favorite body, always store them connected. When you do have to change a lens, point the body downward, remove the lens, and put the other lens on with, again, the body facing downward. This is to help some dust from getting in there. And as I mentioned about the auto cleaning, the camera needs to be horizontal and still when you do auto cleaning. Okay, there's a quick sky test for dust. Dust may be no problem at all at f5.6 or f8, but then be a disaster at f16 or 22. So what I do is I'll pick a nice clear day and I'll go out and I'll set the camera to give me a good exposure of the sky. I'll zoom to maximum and I'll focus on my foot. And I'll hold that focus and I point it up at the blue sky and take a picture. If there's any dust, that out of focus photograph, anything in the sky will be dust. And because you want to do this at f/22, the dust will be magnified so that you can see, or intensified so you can see it easier. Cleaning, however, cleaning your camera, I always recommend that you get somebody to clean it for you that knows what they're doing. If you clean a sensor yourself, it could cost you $1,000 in repair. So my recommendation is to get somebody to do it for you. But if you've got to do it yourself, you can request from me a one-page instruction sheet on how to clean it yourself using a dust rocket like the one pictured here. I still can't recommend to you to use swabs, because if you go out and you clean it, you scratch it, you might be mad at me. But again, if you have an extra $1,000 in your pocket, if you scratch it or damage it, that's no problem for me. But I do have a treatise on how to clean with the dust rocket. Umbrellas and soft boxes. There's been a big debate in photography about should you use an umbrella, should you use a soft box, and when should you use it. Soft boxes are like light shotguns. They send most of the light out in a general direction, and they're nice when you don't want the light to fall anywhere else. For example, if you want to light somebody with a black background, using a soft box will make that a lot easier because the light will not spread to the background as much. However, if what you're doing needs the light spread like a white background or green screen, white umbrellas are your best bet. When you buy umbrellas, avoid silver and satin umbrellas, and most of them are satin. What you want is a paper white umbrella. And I can give you a link to someone who sells those very inexpensively if you're interested. But again, the umbrella needs to be paper white, not satin or silver. Now you might say, well, why? Silver umbrella is a lot brighter. In fact, it puts out a whole stop more. But the light is very directional and very contrasty. And remember those shiny faces in the overexposed pictures? We already have a challenge in digital photography with people with shiny faces. So you don't want to use a light source that causes it to be any worse. That's why a flat white umbrella gives you much better results in digital photography. Okay. Umbrellas, silver, shoot-through versus white, and that's what we just discussed. But there's also a trick about aiming umbrellas that almost nobody knows. This is another dirty little secret of digital photography. See the shaft of these umbrellas? Most people will set up an umbrella with a light and point the shaft directly at the subject, maybe at the chest. Depending upon how your umbrella mounts to the shaft, it actually is not projecting the best part of the light if you aim the shaft at them. If the shaft mounts on your umbrella on the top, like the one on the left, you're illuminating mostly the bottom half of the umbrella. The bottom half of the umbrella is curved upward, so it's actually casting the light out at an upward angle. If you aim the shaft directly at someone, you're actually lighting above them. So it's best with a shaft that mounts on top of the light to tip them down a little lower. If I'm doing a head and shoulders portrait, I'll aim it down at the belly button or a little below. And this way I get a much more even light. If, however, I'm using a strobe where the shaft goes through the bottom of the strobe, I'm primarily illuminating the top half of the umbrella, which throws the light down at an angle. So in order to compensate for that, I keep the shaft of the umbrella perfectly level. And you can check this with a meter. Point your shaft straight ahead and see where the brightest spot on your meter is on a wall. And you'll find that if the shaft is mounted on the top, the brightest spot will be a little above center. And if the shaft marks below, the brightest spot will be a little below center. So again, this is one of those dirty little secrets that most people don't know. I'm glad to share it with you. Viewing the monitor outdoors on your camera. I'm sure you've had this challenge where you've gone outside and you wanted to see what's on the monitor, but it's just too bright and everything looks too dark. Turning up the brightness on the monitor doesn't help. It just flattens it out. So what I recommend you do is either shell out the bucks and go to Hoodman and buy a loop specially built for your camera, Or you can go to any camera shop that's been open since the film days, and they're going to have a box of these little loops. They're inspection loops for looking at negatives. And they probably haven't sold one in 10 years. But they'll pull out the box and dust it off and sell you one for $5 or $6. And all you have to do is wrap black tape around the plastic area on the bottom. Now you've got a little light box. So when you look at the monitor on the back of your camera, you just place this on the back of the camera and you don't have interrupting glare or flare. In fact, I tie a little string onto this and dangle it from my D-ring. So anytime I want to look at the back of the camera, I can grab that and do it. Why, that one tip's worth the cost of admission. Okay. At this point, I'm going to share with you a few tips about cropping and posing and such, and well, cropping primarily. And there are a total of a handful of cropping points that are legal on the human body. A head and shoulders photograph cuts through the center of the chest. A half-length photograph cuts at the belly button. Arm folds are a very classic half-length pose. Three-quarter poses are a little bit trickier. They crop someplace between the hip and the knees. If you crop just the knees off, there's going to be a whole lot of leg that you don't need. So what I do is I look at my bottom posing point. For example, if it's a young man with his hand in his pocket, I'll use the bottom of that hand to be the bottom of my posing point, and I'll crop just below that. Primarily, it's a three-quarter pose, but only show as much below the hip as you need to. There is no crop that exists between three-quarter and full length. If you crop and show the knees in the picture, it's neither fish nor fowl. You have to show everything or above the knees. Now, the only caveat to this is if someone's seated, you might show the knees. If someone's standing in the Captain Morgan pose where they've got a foot up on something, the raised knee can be shown, but the other one should not be to make it a good three-quarter photograph. And inside your camera, your view is 4:6 format. That's not even quite a 5:7. It's a little shorter than a 5:7. So if you want to make an 8:10 of that image, you've got to cut off the top and bottom 10% of the picture to make an 8:10 out of it. 8:10, 16:20, other sizes similar. So what I recommend that most people do is acquire a mask for your camera. Now, this doesn't work in mirrorless cameras, but any camera with a focusing screen in it, the focusing screen can be replaced with a mask that shows the ideal crop. And this particular mask works for every single image you take. If you take a picture at a wedding, you now know by looking at the 8:10 area if you're going to crop somebody off in a group. Any couple or individual photograph you take, the tallest person's head would be at the hairline, which is just above her head. If you're doing standard head and shoulders portraits, like for school, the chin line comes in really handy. That way they're all the same. If you're doing a full length, the top of the head touches the top line, the toes touch the toe line, but everything stays inside the 8:10 area. These are, without a doubt, the handiest things to have in your camera to, again, save on post-production time. Remember what I said about Photoshop? Photoshop is an adult video game. Here's a group. The same lines you would use for the head and the toe become the shoulders of the group, and it makes a perfect prop for an 8:10. Now, as far as I know, there's only one guy in the country selling these things. He is in Florida. His name is Scott Hellberg. The name of his company is viewfindermask.com. And if you happen to be a customer of Pounds or Nations, he'll give you a little bit of a discount. That particular mask right there is called the Marion mask. I designed it because I didn't like the one that they were using standard, but it makes it really easy to get head sizes right. I don't get anything off of that. There's no kickback or anything. Okay. Now, I've kind of gone through this a little quickly, so I'm going to be expecting some questions shortly. I want to give you a brief glimpse at some of the future trainings that we're going to be doing. We're going to have one on Introduction to Green Screen. It's going to help you become a green screen pro without taking all the arrows and insults that someone breaking into green screen has to do. Green screen, if you hit a search for green screen software, you'll get 181,000 hits. Everybody's got an opinion. Well, one of the advantages I have is that I work with hundreds of photographers on a daily basis, and I know 100 different ways to break a steel ball. The advantage to that is I've seen the way it should be done. I'll be more than happy to share my secrets with you. Here's some green screen attacks here, but you can also use it for standard portrait photography with a standard background to give your customer a choice of backgrounds. And green screen is not like it used to be. It no longer has that cut out appearance. The software has gotten much better, and if you use a lab that knows what they're doing, they can certainly cut that green out and make it look very realistic. Another presentation that we'll be having in the future is simplified outdoor portrait lighting. And this is a way that one person can go out and do really good portrait lighting with nothing but their camera and a strobe on their camera. You don't have to have hot and cold running helpers holding scrims and reflectors and things. It's an additive lighting technique, and I've been teaching it for years, and it's something that's simple enough to teach employees. I know that when we hire people as photographers who quite often don't have the skills necessary to shoot outside and do it consistently well, this class will teach them how. Another presentation that we're planning is classic portrait lighting. And in the classic portrait lighting presentation, we'll be going over not only how to build a classic portrait, but also how to correct for nature's errors in somebody. For example, if they got a big nose or a broad face, a high forehead, or they have no chin or anything along that line, this program will allow you to correct those things. It's called plastic surgery with the camera. So that's another very popular promotion, and we'll be doing it again in the not too distant future. Do we have some questions, John?
Well, one of the main things people were asking before, and I think we posted publicly, is that yes, this will be available to watch later, and also Marion will provide his contact information for you guys if you have any other more in-depth questions, and if you guys need any training, he does one-on-one training for our customers. I think the first question I see, go ahead. Yeah, it was about cropping. If you go back to your part of the presentation, it was just about the 8x10 crop, and what do you do in spring when you do spring full frame and you're doing different posing? I don't know if you, I think you already did cover that, but we can go back to that. They might have missed it, it looks like. As far as full body versus up close, how do you crop for that? You know, being that the 8x10 versus package print.
Let's go back even one more slide here. I think this is going to be the one you're interested in. This is the full view of the camera. The 8x10 area is the purple thin line, and I always shoot so that I can make an 8x10. If I want to make a 5x7, I can either come in on the edges of the 8x10 or I can show the whole frame. But if I don't crop as if it's going to be used as an 8x10 and I want to make an 8x10, a 16x20, a 20x24 or whatever, I'll end up having to chop top and bottom. So I want to make sure that there's no body parts in those areas.
Okay, hopefully that answers the question. I know we see that a lot with, there's a lot of cropping that happens afterwards and they send it to the lab and then, you know, wondering why things are so different and then they're losing feet or they're losing the top of the head. That seems to be a common question.
That's where the mask comes in so very handy because it's got a line for the toe and it's got a line for the top of the head. If you look carefully at this image, there's a red line at the toe and a red line at the top of the head. Those same lines are on the mask. It's the can they see my arrow? They can't, can they?
I think they can. Yeah, they should be able to see your mouse. I can see your mouse.
Okay, yeah, that my mouse is on the toe line. That's the toe line. This up here at the top is the hairline. So you don't use it except for head and shoulders portrait. There's a chin line. These will keep you out of trouble. This area all the way around is what an 8x10 would crop to. Do we have another question? While we're waiting for questions, I'll show you another little bonus piece of information. Hold on.
Perfect.
Okay, the good side and the bad side of the face. This is how you can look at somebody and tell what side you should photograph them from. In reality, a face is almost never symmetrical. In fact, the only time a face is perfectly symmetrical is a high-paid model. Generally, when you're looking at someone, one eye is a little bit bigger, the mouth is slightly crooked, and this is a more realistic thing. Whereas you can see on this young lady, there's greater distance from the corner of her mouth to her eye on the right than there is from the corner of her mouth to the eye on the left. In the there was a TV show that lasted exactly one episode about 3 years ago called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where Dr. Jekyll was a surgeon, and of course Mr. Hyde was a different kind of surgeon. In that show, every time they photographed him as Dr. Jekyll, they photographed him from only one side, and every time they photographed him as Mr. Hyde, they only photographed him from the other. Let's look at what this can do for us. If you draw a line through the eyes and a line through the corners of the mouth, they will come together at one point in the distance. That's the point of distance. What you can do with that knowledge is when you photograph someone, if you photograph from that side of the face, they look pleasant. Shooting from that side of the face, they look pleasant. But when you shoot from the other side of the face, they look sinister. Let's see that again. You'll almost never see this guy from the other side. It's in his contract, so if he had one now. It's in his contract, so he's primarily photographed from this side. Same thing's true of Barbara Streisand. She has the same problem. And if you photograph him from this side, he looks pleasant. On that side, where the lines go off in the distance and separate, they look sinister. So that's a little bonus. Do you have another question now?
I do. Let's see here. About photographing people that are, on the heavier side.
That's a wonderful. If you're doing a standard head and shoulders portrait, and you've got somebody who's built a little bit hefty, especially the ladies, but it's also the guys, you want to hide that. Now, I had a photographer once who thought hiding it meant zooming back so their head would be smaller, but that was totally the wrong thing to do. By doing that, they just showed more of the body. To thin a head and shoulders portrait's quite simple. You pose them sitting on the stool up straight, but then you have them lean forward toward the camera from the hip. The key here is from the hip. This projects the head out in front of the body, pulls the extra weight under the neck tight, and when you photograph them, their body is further away than their head, so the head appears larger, the body appears smaller. Also, I always crop above the breast line whenever possible if someone's heavy. If I shoot too low, then we're just showing off the tummy, and we don't want to do that. Now, in general photography, we turn somebody usually anywhere between 25 and 45 degrees to one side or the other, and that thins them. But don't think that you can turn them more than 45 degrees, because what will happen is it'll show off the weight bulge. Another good tip, if you're going to be photographing somebody that's a little heavy, make sure they're not wearing a sleeveless dress, because then it's impossible to hide things correctly. Okay? Now, you can actually say, if someone says, boy, I wish you could take off 10 pounds, you can look at them and say, yes, I can. You pose them sitting up straight and lean them toward the camera from the hip. That's a very good question.
Absolutely. I have one more that I get. It's very common here too, unless anyone has any more to type. We have a question about glasses glare.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. Glasses glare. If you're shooting in the studio or shooting in a studio type situation and you have glass glare, it can cost you, because in school photography, that's the largest percentage of refunds because of the glare in the glasses. Well, this is part of my portrait class, but we'll go ahead and share it with you now. There are 4 tricks to getting rid of glasses glare, and the one that everybody does is wrong. Okay? The thing is, glass glare primarily comes from your fill light, because that's the one closest to the camera. The first step to getting rid of glass glare is to make sure your camera is higher than normal. The correct height for a camera in a portrait is eyebrow level, center of the lens, even with the eyebrows. That's the correct height for most portraits. But when you're photographing somebody wearing glasses, we raise the camera to the top of their hair level. It's another 4 inches higher. At that point, we're looking down at them slightly, and it helps get the glare out, but that's step one. If that doesn't work, you go to step two. And step two is you can tip the chin down a little bit or turn the head slightly to the side. The definition of slightly is the diameter of a nickel. If you tip the head more than a nickel or turn to the side more than the distance of a nickel, diameter of a nickel, you'll get a very odd looking portrait, and it wouldn't So again, step one is camera above eye level. Step two, tip the chin or turn the head slightly. If they have a weight problem, you don't want to be tipping the chin. Step three works in 90% of the cases. In step three, what I do is I ask them to take the glasses off and put them back on with the earpieces about a finger's width above their ears. Now, if you were doing a profile, you'd see that that earpiece is up above their ears, but you're not. You're having them look directly at you. So with the earpieces high, the lenses are tilted forward, the glass glare is thrown out of the picture. And that works on almost 90% of all glass glare. It takes a little extra time to do that, and since I primarily train volume photographers, I don't want them to do that step till they've tried the first two, which are quicker. The fourth and final correction for glass glare is not to raise the lights. You'll see blogs everywhere that say, raise your lights for glass glare. Well, if you raise your lights, everybody will have a little black beard under the neck. Not very pretty, and you end up forgetting to lower the lights, and then everybody you photograph from then on has a goatee. The trick, the fourth item, the last thing you do is you pick up your fill light and you move it out in an arc away from the camera. So it's still the same distance from the subject, but it's a foot further out. This gives you a larger, more open area to get the glass glare out. So the 4 steps of glass glare are camera above head level. Number 2, tip the chin or turn the head slightly. Number 3, tip the frames slightly. No more than the thickness of your finger. Oh, by the way, take those glasses off and put them back on, or you'll puff their hair up around their ears. And finally, move the fill light to glass glare position, which is about a foot further away from the camera. That's a wonderful question.
Great answer too. And we can look forward to that, I guess, in future webinars, which also piggybacks on the next question from one of the attendees, which is, will there be an outdoor photography webinar?
Say again? Oh, I was going to say the outdoor class, all you really have to do, all you really need is a good way to get an exposure. That's a tune meter or or exposure target, and a flash and a camera. Ideally, a flash with TTL. And we'll show you everything you need to know to get it done right.
All right. On that note, we'll definitely look forward to that and many more of these complimentary webinars. And thanks, everybody, for your time, for joining us today. Thank you, Marion.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everybody.